and we're going to dive into some of the science of poison ivy. All right. So, poison ivy, not friend, definitely foe. Or is it? All right. So, everyone, I think, is pretty familiar with this idea of leaves of three, let it be. So, we're going to talk a little bit about poison ivy. And what I want you to really focus on is on each one of these slides, I'm going to have a different picture of poison ivy. So, and I did that way people can see how diverse poison ivy can look. Because one of the first things to properly tending to poison ivy is to be able to identify it. So make sure that you're paying attention to the different examples of poison ivy that I have on each slide, and hopefully it'll be beneficial as you walk through the woods. So we're going to get started with some of the botanical properties of poison ivy. It's known as Toxicodendrons radicans. And in Minnesota, we have two varieties, the first of which is the Western poison ivy. And this one can grow as a shrub, a short shrub, so like 1 to 2 foot tall, comes out of a main stalk, or it can spread across the ground as a sort of ground cover. So the example that I have right here is an example of that shrub-like growth. And so if you take a close look at this, now mind you, this is me zooming in on my camera, not me like getting right in there. Um, but you'll see that we have this whole branching pattern that comes out of this one upright growth. Contrast that with the ground cover style of growth. And so what you'll see here is that up by my hand, which actually before we talk about that, this is not proper personal protective equipment. You do not go and pick poison ivy wearing a tank top and capris, but this was kind of, in my opinion, urgent because it was growing in my kids' play set. And so I went in there without changing clothes. I just grabbed my double gloves and called it good. But what you'll see is up by my hand, there is one small green growth, and that is a single woody branch with the three sets of three leaves, and the rest is all rhizome. And so poison ivy is really effective at growing underneath the surface of the ground and spreading that way. And so that is what makes that kind of ground cover growth style. And those are the two major ways that Western poison ivy can grow. And now let's contrast that rhizome style growth. Oh, yep, and there's the little green. Uh, Contrast that with the actual vine style growth. And so Eastern poison ivy is well known for its ability to vine and climb up trees. And so if you're looking at poison ivy with a really woody vine to it and it's climbing up a tree, chances are it's going to be the Eastern variety of poison ivy, and these can grow well beyond 12 feet long. And so these are really big poison ivy vines. The foliage of poison ivy is pretty diverse. So on the previous picture, you saw that it can be that really bright green. It can also be dark green. But in the spring, it has this really pretty color, actually, where it is kind of a maroon edge with a green center. And so that's what we are looking here on the left. Oh, I do have a cursor today. And so this is an example of poison ivy as it is emerging from the ground. You can see that we have that kind of woody stalk. And so this is the woody stalk that is out of the ground, and then there's rhizomes under the ground. But we'll see that this poison ivy, as it grows, it's actually one of the few plants as it is emerging from the ground that takes on that maroon color with the three sets of leaves. And so in the spring, it's really easy to identify poison ivy. Then it goes through that green color during the summer, and then in the fall, it does change colors as well, and it can take on this deep red to brown color. And so in areas that have high concentrations of poison ivy, it can kind of look like this overwhelming red area. So if you're looking at the ditches in particular next to highways, where poison ivy really likes to grow, it can be this really pretty red to crimson color. The foliage itself is really quite glossy, and so if it looks shiny, probably just shouldn't touch it. And that's all I have to say about that part. It is a flowering plant, and so we have these yellow-green flower clusters that grow kind of close to that woody stem. And these flower clusters come out in June to July, and they are dioecious, meaning that there are male flowers on one plant, female flowers on another, and they do require cross-pollination, which, given the abundance of poison ivy, is actually really quite easy to do. So in the event that those flowers become pollinated, they produce this white or waxy berry, or white waxy berry. And so they're kind of that white green color, really kind of interesting and a great food source for birds. Like I had mentioned, it is a woody perennial, meaning that it is a little bit more challenging to get rid of. We'll talk more about that at the end of the presentation, but just drawing your attention to that woody stem there, that emerges from the ground. And then, of course, the vine in the eastern poison ivy is also quite woody. And then when looking at the leaves, poison ivy does have a pointed tip, which you can see right here with this arrow on the bottom. And so it has a pointed leaf tip, and it can have smooth leaf margins, or in the case of this first example, it can have irregular toothed leaf margins. And so it can be really quite diverse with what the leaves look like. And hopefully you'll be able to see that as we move through the presentation. So here's an example of that. So this is poison ivy, completely different look than what we were looking at with the last. So in Minnesota, it is no longer considered a noxious weed. And although you may say, oh my gosh, why would they do that? It was actually for the purposes of making sure that resources, time, and energy are focused on non-native noxious weeds. And so it was removed from the noxious weed list in Minnesota in 2025. And it is native to Minnesota. In fact, its range goes all the way from Canada down to South America. And so it is in great abundance across basically all of the United States. Its preferred habitat is woodland areas or savannas. So savannas, you can think of that as like the transition area between the woodlands and the prairies. And so these are the places that still have trees, just maybe not as dense as the woods. Additionally, it grows really quite well in disturbed areas. And so if we think about the damage that takes place every year when we put salt on our roads and then we end up having this great kill off, right? So it grows really, really well in right-of-ways or our ditches. It also grows really well on stream banks and pasture edges. And it is considered a pioneer species, meaning that after the disruption of the soil has taken place, it does take root pretty easily and spreads pretty aggressively. And so it is a pioneer species. It's one of the first plants that you'll often find in disturbed areas. But it also plays a really valuable role in erosion control. Because of the way it grows, especially Western poison ivy with the rhizomes, it can play a really awesome role in stabilizing the banks and other disturbed areas. And so will prevent that type of soil runoff in the event of heavy rain. And poison ivy is incredibly adaptable. It can grow well in full sun all the way to full shade. And yep. And no conversation about poison ivy is complete without discussing urushiol. And that is the oily substance that gives those leaves that glossy look and leads to the rash. So we're actually, because I am a scientist, I could not help myself. We're going to dive into what urushiol is all about. So what is something that is really cool about urushiol is that it is not unique to poison ivy, sumac, and poison oak. It is actually something that is produced by many plants within the family of the Anacardiaceae, which is the cashew and sumac family. And so with that, you might have heard that we do not sell raw cashews with the shell on. And this actually has to do with the urushiol that is present with raw cashews with the shell on. And so even though raw cashews that you can pick up at like Costco or wherever you do your shopping, you can pick up raw cashews, but they have been treated in some way with heat. And in the case of raw cashews, usually that's steaming. And then of course we have things like roasted cashews, and that is to neutralize the urushiol. And then mangoes. This one I actually thought was really interesting. This was new to me. Mangoes also belong to this family, and mango skins contain urushiol. And so our mango pickers are often exposed to high degrees of urushiol. And what is nice about being in the United States, especially in Minnesota, is by the time those mangoes get all the way up to us, they are aged mangoes. And so they have far lower potency of that urushiol. And because they're older, right? And then an interesting tidbit, something that I also stumbled across while I was putting this together, is that case studies exist where people have had accidental desensitization of like the urushiol, so poison ivy, by eating raw mangoes. Though I caution anyone from trying that themselves because you do run some serious risks, and that includes breaking out in a rash around your mouth because, mangoes are juicy and there is that chance, and also the chance of like GI distress, and then just an overall allergic response. And so take that with a word of caution, but I did think that that was pretty interesting. And then another one is smoke tree. And so this is an ornamental plant in Minnesota. It is not native to Minnesota, but there are two varieties. Well, there's actually many different varieties. There's the American smoke tree that is native to the Appalachian region. And then there are European varieties and also Asian varieties. And the smoke tree does, in fact, have urushiol in the sap. And so you have to treat pruning a smoke tree similar to how you would handle poison ivy. And so make sure that you're using gloves, make sure that you take proper care of any type of clothing, exposure risks, and then cleaning up your tools when you're done. So there is a caution that comes with this really beautiful tree because if you see it in person, they are really quite remarkable. All right, so urushiol is a catechol derivative, and a catechol derivative is just a fancy word of saying this ring right here. So this is a benzene ring that has a substitution at the one position and the two position. And so this is 1,2-dihydroxybenzene. But the reason that I show this is actually because of this derivative. And so this is the R. And the R is an alkyl side group. And so this can be a great number of different possibilities. And part of the human response to urushiol is actually dependent on what type of urushiol is being produced by the plant. And so here we have a whole bunch of different varieties, but generally speaking, pentadecyl carbons, so 15 carbon chains right here at this R group is belongs with the poison ivy and sumac, and then heptadecyl is 17 carbons, and that is with poison oak. And so they all produce a similar compound, but it is in fact unique. And different poison ivy plants can also produce different types of urushiol. And so this alkyl side group, an easier way to think of this is like a lipid, so a fatty acid. And if you think about that, that's also part of what gives it that glossy look or the oily look, right? And so what is also really interesting, and the reason why I highlighted these chemical structures here is because this equals sign is actually representative of a double bond. And so that would be an unsaturated bond. And the number of these double bonds is what influences the reactivity that a person has based on their exposure. And so the more unsaturated bonds, the higher degree of reactivity. Now, that might seem like a lot, but I want you to put that in the back of your heads because we're going to come back to that at the end of the presentation. All right, so when exposed to urushiol, many people, about 85% of people, come down with what's known as allergic contact dermatitis, which is the same as contact hypersensitivity. And this is a non-IgE mediated immune response. For the non-immunology people out there, that just means that you're not going to come down with anaphylactic shock with the exposure. So generally speaking, this is something that's going to take a little bit of time. You're not going to have the exposure to poison ivy and then 20 minutes later break out in a rash. Generally, this is something that takes several days. And in fact, this is allergic contact dermatitis is a CD8 T cell mediated response. And so these are cytotoxic T cells. So the name right there, cyto meaning cell, toxic meaning harm or poison. So these T cells are actually involved in the death of other cells. That is their job. And so when exposed to urushiol, those T cells end up seeing that as foreign, which does make sense. But then the immune response is too great and we end up with that big rash. And so this is a slower response. It's not part of the innate immune response. It's part of the adaptive immune response, meaning that it can take anywhere from 1 to 10 days for allergic contact dermatitis. Usually with poison ivy, we're looking at 2 to 4 days. And the way that it all starts is because of that oil, which is right here with that R group. And that oil is what allows the urushiol to penetrate that skin barrier. All right, so we're going to take this panel by panel briefly. Okay, so what we have here up in the red is an example of urushiol. And so this urushiol is able to cross the skin barrier where it binds covalently with proteins. Covalently means that it's just not going to come undone. So it's stuck there. We're stuck with it for good. Okay, so once that happens, we call these haptens. And these haptens produce a really robust immune response. So this is an antigen presenting cell. And these antigen presenting cells can then interact with those CD8 T cells, or in this case, they're labeled as Th1 cells. And that ends up producing what's known as interferon gamma. So this is the start of a really significant pro-inflammatory cascade that results in the development of all of that fluid that comes with the rash. And then effectively, what ends up happening is because that interferon gamma is released, we have a whole bunch of pro-inflammatory cytokines that get released by our skin itself. And that is what leads to that swelling. Because then these pro-inflammatory cytokines bring in other immune cells. And with those immune cells, we're bringing in water, we're bringing in more inflammation. And it's just the type of cascade that kind of builds upon itself until finally it wipes itself out. And so this is where this whole rash, the itchiness, everything, the swelling, the redness, this is all part of our immune response. So that is that. Hopefully it doesn't look quite as intimidating anymore. All right, so the non-obvious takeaway point here is that the whole don't scratch it, it will spread is not actually grounded in science. The don't scratch it, of course, you don't want to scratch the rash because you don't want to invite secondary infection from the scratching process. But rest assured that if you cannot control yourself and you're like me who scratches it at night while I'm sleeping, chances are you're not going, well, not chances, you won't be spreading it from the blisters. The spreading has already happened leading up to that. All right. So other tidbits about urushiol, it's an incredibly stable compound. So this benzene ring, incredibly stable. These alkyl side groups, incredibly stable, meaning that it's going to hang around for a long time. And if you contaminate your tools, it can sit on your tools in the proper environment 1 to 5 years or even longer. Another fun story that I had found when I was looking into the urushiol is that there is a documented case of a museum worker working with a 50-year-old specimen of poison ivy. And because it was held in the proper climate control, they ended up breaking out in poison ivy. And so it can hold on or it can be stable for a really long time. All right. And it can persist in dormant and dead plants. And so after you go through and you kill it, however you choose to, the urushiol still remains quite active. And so if you're dealing with dead plants, let's say that you're going out in the spring and you're cleaning up a whole bunch of green stuff. Well, it's no longer green, it's brown stuff. You have a risk of coming into contact with active urushiol. And that includes dormant plants over the winter, as well as those that have been chemically treated and are dead. In climates where it is dry and warm, poison or the urushiol can persist for longer. And so if you think about storing your, I don't know about you, but I store mine in a heated garage. Chances are I'm making it far more likely that that urushiol stays on my tools over the entirety of the winter. However, it does break down quite well in water. The exposure, so let's say that you're out in the gardens and you're working and you go, oh, shucks, I just encountered some poison ivy. You have about 30 minutes. And it's not a hard and fast 30 minutes. Every single person is going to be a little bit different. It also depends on your skin integrity and just you as a human being. And so, generally speaking, you have about 30 minutes before that urushiol is fully absorbed and there's nothing else you can really do about it. And so, at that first chance of exposure, go inside and try and wash it off. And that has a lot to do with if we remember that first panel, we have this urushiol exposure here. It crosses the skin barrier. And so you have about 30 minutes to try and remedy that. Now, there is no guarantees that if you catch it within that 30 minutes that you're not going to have some sort of reaction, but you minimize the intensity of that reaction. And so the recommendations are to wash with soap and cool water. So I am very susceptible to poison ivy. And we moved back to Minnesota in 2018 to a really great property that's got tons of poison ivy. And so, what I found works best for me is we actually have Dawn in every single one of our showers and by our sink. And the type of Dawn that we use is the non-concentrated Dawn because it's a little bit more gentle on your skin. And so, using a non-concentrated dish detergent is a little bit more effective than just your hand soaps at getting that oil off of your skin. And then another thing to remember is that you're also going to need to clean your pets, your tools, and your clothes. And then remember that this is a delayed reaction, and so it's not unusual to go and spread that urushiol oils prior to any signs of reaction. And so when people say, oh, you can't scratch it because it'll spread, that's actually grounded in the fact that generally speaking, we are spreading it ourselves. And so like, oh, I've got an itch on my arm, but I've got urushiol on my arm, and now I'm going to scratch my face. Well, you just moved it to your fingers, and now it's on your face. And so this is one of those things. And depending on where it is on your body, you might also have a difference in when it shows up as a rash. And so, on the arm, it might show up in 2 days, but it might take 4 days on your face. It just depends on you personally. All right. So believe it or not, there are some incredible good things about poison ivy. One is that it is a native plant to Minnesota. And when it is flowering, it is a great pollinator plant. And because it is a pioneer species, it's some of that first vegetation to come in to the disturbed environments and cuts down on that risk of erosion. And so it helps restore vegetation. However, it is really aggressive. And so, like I mentioned, erosion control and also bank stability. So any of those steep banks leading down to the lakes or to the rivers, it grows really well right there, and it prevents erosion from happening. And it also provides quite a bit of forage. And so the greens are eaten by deer, rabbits, and muskrats. And the berries are a really great food source for birds, especially in the fall and winter. But that is also how poison ivy manages to spread because those seeds are also quite good at taking root. All right, so the bad. It is aggressively able to spread in disturbed soils, meaning that once it's there, you're going to have quite the job trying to get rid of it. It also is very effective at outcompeting young plants. The climbing habit, especially of that eastern poison ivy that we talked about, can damage structures. And it is difficult to remove mechanically, especially the western variety, which grows by rhizomes. The urushiol is persistent and can last for quite a long time on tools, gloves, and pet fur. And there's this thing called winter invisibility, meaning that in the fall, once the greenery has gone away, and if you're doing any type of work there and you encounter a vine, you don't know if you're dealing with poison ivy because all parts of poison ivy contain urushiol. It's the leaves, the flowers, the berries, the roots. And so when working in the fall or in the spring, when you can't see those leaves of three, that's when you run a really great risk at coming down with poison ivy. I can say that one with absolute experience because that is what happened when we moved our kids' play set. And you saw me holding that vine. We moved it into what we found out to be was a poison ivy patch, but we moved it prior to knowing that there was poison ivy in that location. And then additionally, in public spaces, there is a management challenge. And so, how do we control this while effectively balancing the risk of chemical treatment with the fact that the public is using a space? All right, so then let's hit the ugly. And I included this picture of poison ivy because when I saw it, it was one of the most terrifying. So you can see that this is probably about 4.5 to 5 feet tall. It's bent over on its side, but it would be quite the intimidating bush if you encountered that out in nature. And so this is completely poison ivy. You can see that it has its berries. These are these big leaves of three. If I had to guess, this is in full shade based on the fact that those leaves are really quite large. All right, so the ugly poison ivy. 85% of people are reactive to poison ivy to some degree. Many of those people are severely reactive to poison ivy. And the concern comes in with the secondary transfer, and that includes to children and vulnerable adults in particular. So let's say dog runs through the poison ivy, comes inside, and then spreads poison ivy all over the furniture and the kids. Now all of a sudden we end up with a really big problem, right? There's also medical complications that come with poison ivy exposure. So in the most severe cases, you might end up in the hospital to attend to the skin reactions as well as the medical complications that arise if you are exposed to smoke. And so that urushiol can land inside the lungs and do some really significant damage to your lungs. So urushiol is in fact aerosolized from burning. And so one of the big no-nos when handling poison ivy is to ensure that you are not burning it because that smoke can be really quite damaging to people. And this also is a consideration when working with firewood that may have been contaminated. So especially any type of firewood that was made from a tree that maybe was killed because poison ivy was vining up on it. But there is a chance too that when working with firewood, there is exposure to urushiol. And the vines can very easily be hidden in natural areas, especially with the many different forms that poison ivy can take. So it might be in a tree, it might be a bush, it might be on the ground. And so it really can be just about anywhere. So we got to be paying attention when we are out in nature. Additionally, it is a perennial, meaning that it comes back from the same root. And so it will continue to come back year after year until it is properly managed. And speaking of removing it, it is also exceptionally hard to remove, especially that Western poison ivy variety, because the rhizomes can break very easily, and those small fragments that are left in the ground can very easily resprout. And so now you have a whole bunch of new little poison ivies. And then also the birds can disperse the seeds, which allows for quick colonization. And chemically, it requires a brush killer. And so with brush killers, that also comes with its own personal risk as you apply those chemicals. All right, so we're going to talk about some of the poison ivy look-alike plants because this is really important to be able to identify what is poison ivy and what is not. And so these are some of the ones that I've learned about on my own property. So these are pretty specific to Crow Wing County. I'm up in the Jenkins area, but up in the Jenkins area versus down here in Brainerd, you're going to be dealing with a lot of the same plants. So we're going to start out with Virginia creeper. So you can see while looking at this, this is actually a 5-leafed vine. It has a smooth vine, but it is a woody vine. And so at first glance, this may come off as, oh gosh, that must be poison ivy, especially if it has lost a couple of its leaves. And so, look carefully when it is fresh out of the ground. So it has just recently emerged. It can also take on kind of that glossy look. So Virginia creeper. And then what we have here is what you look at in the middle of summer on our driveway. And so we actually have a couple of plants here. And the first one is hog peanut. So hog peanut really takes off in the middle of summer, but it is a delicate herbaceous vine. So it's not woody. It dies all the way back to the ground and then comes back out the next year. And this also has 3 leaves, but you can see that those leaves do in fact have a different look to them. And the way that it grows is also a bit different. And so it grows as a delicate vine with many different shoots coming off. Also in this picture is raspberry, and raspberry also comes with 3 leaves. It's really easy to mistake, especially as raspberry is emerging in the spring. It also takes on this It has a toothed edge to it, which poison ivy can have, but it grows off of a, what do we call that? The raspberry stem. I'm blanking
Okay.
now. Cane. It grows off of a thorny cane. Thank you. And related to the raspberry is blackberry. So this is another rubus species. And blackberries, depending on how they're growing, they can have 3 leaves or 5 leaves. And that also grows off of a thorny cane. And then native strawberries. And so this is the woodland strawberry. And if you ignore these red strawberries that are growing right there, so think about what this would look like in the spring before the flowers come in, before the fruit comes in. This can be a really intimidating thing because this also grows in leaves of 3 and it grows as a ground cover across the ground, though it is non-vining even if it does send out runners. All right, now we have wild sarsaparilla. This one is interesting to include because it also emerges with that crimson color. And so it also has a upright growth, but it is usually, so the leaves of 3, poison ivy also comes out with stems of 3. And so it's usually 3 stems with 3 leaves on each stem. Sarsaparilla is also kind of interesting in that it comes out and branches into 3, but usually we have 5 leaves, not 3, though there is some differences between different plants. And so some might have 2 and 3. These ones are kind of startling to encounter, but these ones are a little bit easier because they have those obvious 5 leaves. All right, so box elder saplings, as they're coming out, they also come out with leaves of 3. They can be easy to mistake for the upright growth habit of poison ivy. And then Jack in the Pulpit. This is one that likes to grow in the shade, also leaves of 3. If you encounter it, though, and you see that it doesn't have any type of sheen, you can see that this one is quite matte. Probably not going to be poison ivy, but I wouldn't get too close. Jack in the Pulpit, the part that you don't see is that there is a flower underneath those 3. And then one of my personal favorites is Trillium. And so Trillium also has these leaves of 3, but you can see that stem is herbaceous and grows straight from the ground. And there's not any signs of being woody. And then, like I had mentioned, we moved back to Minnesota in 2018. We moved into a property where we didn't know what type of landscaping had been done. And so all of a sudden, I'm walking by our garage and we've got this woody vine and it's shooting out this plant here that looked like it had 3 leaves. But actually, these are 3 lobes to a single leaf. This is hops. And so we have hops that are growing, and this can grow similar. It comes from a woody vine, right? And then the last one is cinquefoil, and this also grows with leaves of 3, though it all comes out of a main taproot. So those are a lot of the different plants that you might encounter that look similar to poison ivy in some way, shape, or form. All right, so I've been working with poison ivy since 2018 because I am very reactive to it. And these are some of the things that I've noticed with poison ivy on our property. So in the sun, poison ivy produces a more compact plant and it comes with this vivid green color. So it's kind of the chartreuse color. And it also has smaller, denser leaves as in comparison to a shade variety of poison ivy. And you can see that those leaves are quite a bit larger. They're actually quite a bit thinner, prone for breakage. And also, as these plants grow, they do end up becoming less glossy. And so they still have kind of that glossy sheen to them, just not near as intense as this lime green one over here. And then, so if you remember, I mentioned that you should keep something in the back of your head because this heat and carbon dioxide can lead to increased potency and higher concentrations of urushiol. And so this is an important consideration as we lead into a world dealing with global warming. And so this was published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, a well-respected journal in the academic world, Biomass and Toxicity Responses of Poison Ivy to Elevated Atmospheric Carbon Dioxide. And what the authors found was that the growth stimulation in a high carbon dioxide setting produced a poison ivy plant that far exceeded the ability to grow than other surrounding woody plants, meaning that it is far more adapted to that environment and can grow stronger than the surrounding plants, meaning it can outcompete the other plants nearby. Additionally, high carbon dioxide plants produce a more allergenic form of urushiol. And so if we think back to that original conversation about the double bonds, chances are it is producing a urushiol that has more double bonds, and so increased allergenic form of urushiol. All right, so that is kind of the scientific background of poison ivy, and I'm sure that the question that people are asking is, okay, so how do I handle this, right? So we're going to dive into the mechanical, biological, and chemical options that you have available to handling poison ivy on your property. So as I already said, this is not proper personal protective equipment or PPE. When trying to move forward with mechanical or manual removal of poison ivy, you have to remember that with 85% of people, they will experience severe hypersensitivity. And just because you've never experienced poison ivy yourself doesn't mean that you cannot become sensitized. And so repeated exposures to poison ivy actually helps drive the hypersensitivity reaction. So if you are manually removing it, it does require personal protective equipment, and that means do it with proper clothes. And so find that long sleeve shirt, find a nice snug fitting pair of pants, closed toe shoes, if not boots. You're going to want gloves. My personal favorite are the Arm & Hammer cleaning gloves with a nitrile glove over top of that. And then for me, the way that I handle this is with a waste receptacle with a bag inside. So I like the 5-gallon bucket with an 11-gallon trash bag. That way I can fold the trash bag all the way to the outside of the bucket, not contaminate my bucket, but still be able to bring the bag back together and close it up when I'm done. And big emphasis here, do not burn it. Do not put it in your compost pile. It goes into the trash and then it is gone. And it's also really important to note that this is not the University of Minnesota Extension recommended procedure because of the significant risk to the individual. But as a scientist, I thought that it was only beneficial to also describe all of the options that are available. So this is an option, but this is not the recommended option. All right, so if a person were to go about doing this, the first thing that you would do is start by finding a woody stem. And so here's that woody stem. You'll notice on that last picture I had it holding up by the woody stem. And then you loosen the stem from the soil. And then you trace backward underneath those rhizomes until you finally either break the rhizome or you hit the end. And then you go backward, you kind of curl it up and you go backward the other direction as best you can to have a single intact plant. And then it goes inside that trash. When you are all done, then you can take off your gloves. Your gloves go in. Remember, we were not contaminating the bag on the outside of the bucket, so you can reach up underneath, flip it back over, close it off, and put it in the trash. Or if you say, whoop, I'm not going to do that, you can put on a new pair of gloves and do all of that. And then you tie off the bag and you dispose it. Once again, emphasis on do not burn it. I like to do this technique in the spring in certain areas simply because it is so easy to identify poison ivy in the spring once you're used to looking for it because of those scarlet red colors. And it's also really important to consider your soil type. So we live basically on a large sandbank, which makes it really easy to pull poison ivy out by the root. But if you are in a location that has maybe better soil, something like with some clay in it or loam or anything like that, something that isn't quite so easy as just basically pure sand, you might have a harder time with this technique. And then also avoid having the soil fly because the soil that is in contact with those rhizomes and the roots that come off those rhizomes are also containing urushiol. And so if you are tilling an area and that soil is flying, there's high likelihood that it will come back to you and then you'll end up with a rash. So, one of my favorite ways that I have not yet used, but have been advocating for in my house is biological means for handling poison ivy. And this is a low risk, medium high success, and that's grazing with goats. Goats really like to eat poison ivy, apparently. And so they're very effective at clearing large patches of poison ivy, but it may require multiple visits. And also, there comes a cost with the hiring of goats and then also finding goats to hire to clear your property. And what's cool about goats is that goats are largely immune to the urushiol. However, the oil can remain on their fur and skin and then be transferred to people. So if you are hiring goats to come out to your property, make sure that you're not petting them in the face. All right, so last is chemical. And this is a medium risk, medium high success. This is the University of Minnesota Extension recommended procedure for handling poison ivy because you yourself are not coming into contact with it. But you do need a specialty brush killer. This is just one example, but you can see here on the label, it specifically states kills poison ivy, poison oak, blackberry, kudzu, and others. So you want something that is a brush killer that has been formulated in a way to get rid of poison ivy. And this is something that needs to be specifically formulated for woody vines. So if we look down here, we've got triclopyr or um, triclopyr. Wow. Triclopyr, and that is a chemical that is very effective at killing poison ivy. So this is the triclopyr salts, and it needs to be emphasized that this is a technique that you only do on windless days because you don't want any type of spray getting back on you, which is where that medium risk comes back into play because you don't want the spray on you. And you also don't want to hit any other type of plant that you actually want to keep around. Do not spray if there is a chance of rain because it does require several hours to be on the plant before it is absorbed by the plant to do the job of killing that plant. And when working with chemicals, it also requires that you are properly dressed. And so you're going to need your personal protective equipment or your PPE. And so making sure that you have your gloves on, long sleeves, long pants. And additionally, it may require repeat treatments to be effective. And this has part of this has to do with the way that poison ivy grows. So it grows as a through rhizomes, right? And so you may be able to take out part of the plant, but part of the plant might be unaffected. And so you're just going to have to kind of circle back and commit to getting rid of it several times over the growing season. And it's once again, rhizomes are part of that. And it's also a woody plant. And so woody plants are just generally more challenging to kill. And after the plant is dead, it still contains urushiol. So if you are removing that plant, exercise caution. All right, so I don't often get to talk about being a scientist since moving to Minnesota. So when I have the opportunity, I overdo it. So I was a biosafety level 3 trained scientist, meaning that I got to gear up in the Tyvek suit, work in the contained environments. It was incredible. But I have specialty training in minimizing contamination and spread. And so the question is, what would a biosafety level 3 trained scientist do? And my answer to that is just try and be smart. And so for me, the first step was to properly identify. And for that, I like two different apps that are on my phone. Now I'm really good at identifying poison ivy. But if you are new to the area or new to the realm of identifying poison ivy, I might recommend Seek, which is by iNaturalist. A really cool app that is supported in part by one of the California institutes as well as one of the governmental institutes, and PlantNet is another really great one. And both of these, Seek is free to use, plant.net or PlantNet is also free to use, but it does come with a subscription package if you find that you really like it. And then step 2 is to evaluate the environment. And so for me, if it is growing in my kids' play space, that's a manual removal because I don't have time to wait for the chemicals to get active. And then you're still going to have to remove it. Otherwise, my kids are going to be exposed. So for the play space, I manually remove it. I just make sure that my kids are elsewhere while that's happening. Again, down by the lake shore, same thing. My kids are down by the lake often. I'm going to manually remove that just to minimize any type of waiting period. Generally speaking, the chemicals that are used on poison ivy are going to be safe to be used along the lakeshore, but that is up to your discretion as to whether or not you're personally comfortable treating poison ivy down by the lake. When it comes to the paths, driveway, and other hard to remove areas on our property, that's where I usually employ chemical treatment. And that has a lot to do with the fact that we have a really long driveway that reasonably I can't get down on my hands and knees and remove all of the poison ivy as it is trying to grow into our cleared driveway area. And also along the paths, if it looks like it's coming too close to the edge of the path, we'll end up taking care of the poison ivy that way. But we have 6 acres of land, and there's just no reasonable way that we are going to be able to clear the poison ivy manually or chemically for that matter. And then in the deep, deep woods, I just leave it. I know that it's there. It's going to be there. It's going to remain there. And I just leave it that way the other critters have something to eat. And for me, that's fine. I know that I'm never going to completely eliminate it on my property and that I will have to remain vigilant in seeking it out and treating it when I do see it. But in the deep, deep woods, I just leave it. And the other option then too would be like hiring on those goats. All right, so after you've evaluated your environment that you want to clear out, then the other consideration is weather. Because if there is any type of rain, you don't want to be using chemicals. I like to do it on a sunny, windless day because for me, it seems like the sun kind of intensifies whatever chemical process is taking place and that poison ivy dies off a little bit faster, but that might be in my head, might be some sort of personal bias, enthusiasm for being outside on a sunny day. But manual removal can happen at any time. I've done this as it's been drizzling outside. I've done this on sunny days, shady days. Just, be mindful of if you're planning on using any type of chemicals on poison ivy, that it gets taken care of when there is no wind. And then number 4, and this is the one that I continue to struggle with because I've got 3 young kids at home, is make sure that you have uninterrupted time. Because one of the greatest risks when dealing with poison ivy is accidental contact with urushiol in the personal protective equipment removal and putting back on. And so each time you take off those gloves, you run the risk of transferring it to your hands and then to wherever else on your body. And so make sure that you have some uninterrupted time. And also consider the time that it takes to gather your materials, so your personal protective equipment, your wastebasket, if you're using chemicals, your chemicals. Take consideration as to the time it's going to take to actually do the job, and then circle back to double check for any type of missed plants. Make time to immediately after you're done with that, clean your tools and properly dispose of the poison ivy because you don't want to say, I'll take care of those tools later and then end up forgetting or having somebody else grab them, and then you have contamination that has just taken place. And then also the time that it takes to clean your clothing and take a cool shower. Remember that you want to take a cool shower. Cool water is the best way to get rid of that urushiol, cool water with a dish detergent. All right, so with that, I say thank you. Go forth with confidence as you tackle your poison ivy adventures. And so we talked a little bit about identifying poison ivy. Hopefully, the pictures have been helpful in identifying the many different varieties that, or many different looks that poison ivy can have. We talked at length about urushiol, also talked about some of the look-alike plants, the different methods for handling poison ivy, including manual removal, biological removal and chemical removal. And then if this is something that you decide that, yep, I'm actually going to take care of my poison ivy problem, the things that you should have before have the growing season sneak up on us is things like gloves. So I personally really like the elbow length cleaning gloves, and then also the nitrile gloves that are usually right past the ankle. You're going to want to have some sort of bucket that you can set aside that is specific to poison ivy because you don't want to run the risk of accidentally contaminating something and then using it for something else. And now you've just kind of made a mess of things, right? And then for me, with the 5-gallon buckets, the 11-gallon trash bags work best, and then proper attire. So with that, if you have any questions, I'll be happy to take them. Hopefully I can answer them. Thank you. Yeah.
I have a suggestion. We had just a couple long strips before the woods got heavy. and I'm violently allergic to poison ivy. So I went to the grocery store bakery
Mhm.
and I got those clear French bread bags
Okay.
and put them up and then
Well, that
put
is
a
clever.
rubber band
Yeah.
around each one.
Yeah.
And of course I had the nitro gloves and what
Yep.
have you. But, and then I dripped. I had a big eyedropper. I don't know what was originally for, but I dripped on the top because I had no intention of trying to pull it out.
Right.
But then I could walk through there,
Right.
drip everything,
Mm-hmm.
then just peeled down those
Yep.
bags
Right.
and rolled it as I went.
Yep.
And then my husband blew dry dead leaves
Yep.
over the whole thing
Further. Yep.
because we were gonna pull in.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a great suggestion. So we just had somebody from the audience suggest protecting the legs using, for instance, some sort of plastic bag, so that you don't end up, in this case, contaminating shoes, and then using like an eyedropper to drip as you walk through the poison ivy patch. Thank you for that. I appreciate that.
But, excuse me, ma'am, what was it you said your husband did at the end?
He just blew dry leaves that were kind of piled up from the previous fall, just to cover it because we weren't going in there.
Yeah.
We don't have pets. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
So it just covered it up.
Just covered it up and,
Gotcha.
Yeah, no, that's great.
pretend it was gone.
Out of sight, out of mind.
Right. Yeah.
I saw a show on TV a while ago and it said that, the more you're exposed, the greater your reaction is gonna be. And it's just natural. People say I'm not allergic to it, but if they do it enough times, they will become. That's
Yep.
true? Yeah.
Yep. So, a really great example that I have for that is my husband. My husband, prior to moving to Minnesota, was not reactive to poison ivy. He was actually my poison ivy go-getter. And he would go around and he'd take care of things. But through repeat exposures, he is now sensitive to poison ivy. And so he'll break out in a rash just like I do. And so I don't have a poison ivy go-getter anymore. But yes, so repeat exposures to poison ivy can both amplify the response that a person has to poison ivy, as well as develop that sensitization that is required for the hypersensitize or hypersensitive reaction that results in the rash. Chuck.
We have a couple patches of poison ivy and I've been working on it for about 5 years.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they're not big, but I just don't seem to like, get ahead of it.
Right.
It's not like it's becoming larger or anything, it's just.
Yep.
Outsmarting me, I guess, right?
Right.
So what am I doing wrong, or is it just gonna come back if I ever get rid of it all someday? Will it come back, or how does that?
There's other options out there too for handling poison ivy. Repeat mowing is actually one way to help combat poison ivy. So if, for instance, with us, we have poison ivy that likes to encroach in our driveways, and we just mow it over. We keep on mowing it down, and then I chemically treat it as I end up seeing those 3 leaves come up. It's kind of just being vigilant, making sure that you're handling it as you see it, and then circling back over and over and over again. And ideally, catching it before it starts to bloom, because once it blooms and then it produces those berries, then those berries are as good as gone, and it's going to be someplace else. And so if you have a resistant type of poison ivy, though, I've not heard of it. But yeah, you could, it's persistent. It is a perennial and it is robust. And so it doesn't take much to stick around in order to, like, if you kill most of it, that's really not good enough because it can just kind of bounce back. Gail, did you have a question?
You do all of this and you happen to get some poison ivy. What's the best thing to do? I know I've seen topical things.
Yeah.
Pharmacy.
Yep.
I can't remember what it's called. Pink stuff.
Yep. Calamine.
Calamine.
Yep.
Yes. What should you do with this?
That's a great question, and it's going to depend on what works best for you personally. And so, number one is to make sure that those oils are gone and that you have tended to whatever was contaminated that you ended up getting. There are clear calamine lotions that exist now, so especially if it's on your face. But it's really treating the symptoms because once that rash comes in, there's really not anything that you can do about it besides treating the symptoms. And so, there's swelling that's involved, so you can take any type of medicine that can combat swelling. So for me, ibuprofen is effective. And so ibuprofen can help alleviate some of that pain too. But yeah, it's topical, making sure that you're just doing your best job at treating the symptoms and ensuring that something doesn't have more urushiol on it. And so that's usually my sign if I'm spreading poison ivy across my body and I don't know like where it's coming from because I'm not encountering it out in nature. That's usually my sign that I need to round up all of my work gloves and then they go into the washing machine for a couple of cycles. And so I wash them on cool water with extra detergent and then let them go through and drain out and then I wash them again. But yeah, it's treating the symptoms because once you have the rash, after that 30 minutes before you even develop the rash, right? So you don't even know that you've been exposed, the damage has been already been done. And so there are lots of different things that are out there that are expensive that have mixed mixed results. And so you can try it and maybe it helps alleviate some of the symptoms, but there's nothing that's actually going to get rid of it. There's no surefire, fast way to alleviate it because it is an allergic response that your body mounted over several days. And so it's not anything that can come with a quick fix. Yeah, Rose.
Yeah, I have one question, or actually two.
Yeah.
So you said you have to wash the clothes that have come in contact with
Mhm.
poison ivy with cold water and detergent
Yep.
twice?
That's usually what I do.
Yeah.
But it's up to you. I kind of overdo things like that. So once is probably enough, but I'm very sensitive to poison ivy and I just don't like the risk. So I usually do it at night, go watch a movie and then circle back and do it again.
It's funny because I always wash everything with the hottest
Yes.
possible water I can
Yep.
because I'm afraid of ticks.
Yep. Yeah, and
So now we got a dilemma.
right. No, and this is a I don't think when it comes to washing your shell off your body, you want to do it with cool water, but I don't think it matters one way or the other when it comes to your clothing and your tools. I would say do whatever it takes in order to put your mind at rest for all of the things to consider. So if you do hot water for ticks, by all means do hot water for ticks. Right,
Just listen to this.
right.
No, that's right. So what about the tools? You said you wash your tools. Do you recommend any particular solution to put in the bucket?
Dawn. I use so much Dawn at my house. And I don't want to advocate for any one particular brand, but I've had great success with Dawn.
Okay.
And so, and when it comes to my tools, I use the concentrated version of it, or like you can use any type of dish detergent. The goal here is to find a dish detergent that is effective at degreasing because you want that oil to loosen up. And then, of course, when you're working with metal tools, you're going to want to dry that right away. That way it doesn't rust. But to be perfectly honest, generally you're not working with a lot of tools when you're handling with poison ivy. And so it's a small concern. It's more of in the event that you have had an accidental exposure. You want to be able to know what you need to do. And so you can soak it, you can wash it with, a paper towel or however you want to do it. But I do end up using Dawn a lot in my house over the summer.
We did have a comment in the chat that they brought in goats and they did not eat the poison ivy.
Oh,
They left the poison ivy, made it somewhat easier to identify.
well, so there is a perk there. So yeah, we had not very good results with goats. So yeah, it's one of those things. You can't force them to eat something that they don't want. Maybe there was something more desirable. And so yeah, goats, buckthorn, yeah. So yeah, so you could try goats, but in this instance, yeah, we've had somebody report in that they did not have good luck. So anything else? All right. Thank you everyone for tuning in person, and thank you to our friends online.
Thank you.
Everybody's